Well, wonderful. Uh, Glad to be with everyone today. And it's my privilege to introduce Marc Crompton from British Columbia, who I've known for many years. And so, Marc, introduce yourself and your school that you're the teacher librarian in.
Yeah, teacher librarian here at St. George's School, which is, I guess, a university prep school for boys in the Vancouver area. We serve typically a higher financial demographic. So most of the students coming here have the resources to be able to entertain university as a post-secondary option, and they're looking at schools all over the world, really, to graduate from here and head out to. So I've been in the Learning Commons. I started as a music teacher here, and I transitioned over to the Learning Commons in about 2009, and I've been here ever since.
Well, great. And so today we want to kind of zero in of all the great things you do. Let's just kind of zero in on technology. And I understand that you were a fairly early adopter of the 3D printer. Tell us about that experience and how that came to be.
Yeah, we purchased our first 3D printer probably in 2010, 2011, MakerBot Replicator 2. It was one of the more popular consumer 3D printers on the market at the time. And we were looking really to see what kind of engagement we would get from students. We had one other teacher at the time who was bucking to get a computer or a 3D printer. But he had very specific needs, and he was looking for a high-end printer with a price tag in the 6 digits. So yeah, that was a big ask, and understandably, administration was hesitant to spend that much money on an unknown technology at that time. I came in and said, well, for just over $2,000, which in comparison is pennies, why don't we run a test and let's see what happens? We'll get one, we'll put it in. It happened to coincide with a renovation of our library space, which was a very traditional library space when I took it over, and a rebranding to more of a Learning Commons model. And so to have the 3D printer in the space kind of opened the door and started to push the idea of what people were looking for from the library and from the Learning Commons space. So the timing was right too. Low risk comparatively. It was an experiment, and we had really no grand aspirations at the time. It was just, let's get it and play.
And did the kids adopt it?
Yeah, the biggest downside to that was there was a period when we first bought it, because I didn't really know the technology all that well. I put it in my office to start with. I have big windows in my office so people can see into my office, but I didn't want people getting hurt if it was, or the machine getting damaged being left out in the public or in a more public space. Now you can see a little bit of the makerspace behind me. We have 3D printers all over the place here. So they're out in the open, but the biggest downside was I often couldn't get into my office in the morning because there were a whole bunch of students crammed in the doorway trying to figure out what the 3D printer was printing that morning.
So anyway, as this progressed, the use of this technology, then I understand it kind of made a huge difference across the school. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was a slow and gradual change. We got to a point where one 3D printer wasn't enough to address the needs of the students. So we bought a second MakerBot. We established a maker club. So it was an after-school program where kids could come, and many people seemed to think it was a 3D printing club because that was what the kids were primarily interested in. I kept trying to push that idea of, well, makers make all sorts of things. 3D printers are just one tool. That eventually expanded. Behind me, I don't know if it's hard to see, behind me, this beast, you're looking at the back of it, is a laser cutter. This is our second laser cutter. We've just replaced our first one, which again was a lower priced in the laser cutter spectrum product, but it certainly showed proof of concept. So when we replaced this with a higher end, faster, and ultimately more expensive machine, we'd already proven the concept. It was going to be used. There were use across the school. We've also had an outdoor ed program here for a number of years where a number of grade 10s spend the year learning about outdoor education, leadership through outdoor education. And at a certain point, administration said, hey, that's a great model. I wonder what would happen if you took that model and expanded it to other areas of interest. I got involved in a discussion about, well, what would that look like for STEM? And so we started a STEM cohort where we have grade 10 boys who spend a year together looking at STEM, and they use the Makerspace. So the needs of that group has also dictated how this space has grown. And then now we're looking at a new building, and when we have the new building, it wasn't even a discussion as to would there be a makerspace. It was, yes, there's going to be makerspaces, and what do we need in them? How are we going to service the needs of the students with that space? And yeah.
So as you watch a technology come in, and first it's kind of a play toy and all that kind of stuff, but as you have looked across the years now, you know, what has the real contribution been to teaching and learning?
Yeah, there's a lot that's said about boys' education, and I don't know how much of it is actual science and how much of it is gut. But I think there is certainly a portion of our student body who learn through experience, learn through hands-on, playing with things, putting things together and just wondering, well, what would happen if? Or just getting their hands dirty and building things because it's fun to build things. We've got a box of Lego kicking around here that sometimes just comes out because, hey, it's a break, I'm going to build something with Lego. So having a space in the school, and because we're a university prep school primarily, we don't have shop spaces in the same way that most of our public school colleagues do. So we do have a wood shop. We do have a theater department, which engages the boys in terms of set construction and design. But other than that, we don't have an auto shop. We don't have a metal shop. We don't have some of those other things that a lot of schools that would service people going into the trades would be important to have. So this kind of fills that niche for those students who, yeah, maybe they're going on into an academic program in university, but they also have a love of tinkering and playing. And it's just such a great mode of inquiry, you know, to just, I wonder what would happen if. Well, let's build it and find out.
And how do the parents react to this? I mean, a lot of times parents, they're so intense on getting kids into academia, you know, and suddenly here comes this toy. Have they accepted it?
Oh, definitely. We are, this year we had probably twice the number of applicants to our STEM program than we could fill positions. So obviously, at least among the students, but they would have to have the support of their parents. There's a recognition that that has value. And also with our admissions tours, because we do have an admissions program, this is one of the first stops. The number of times I see a student pulling a kid, a prospective family into the space saying, well, look, this is our library. Look at all the books, and look over here. We've got 3D printers. And it's a highlight of that tour.
Yeah, that's great. Well, a lot of schools would really like to really improve their concept of a makerspace and its impact on teaching and learning across the school. What's your advice to superintendents and administrators and others on, trying to develop this whole concept?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, it has to be a public space. A lot of our shop spaces, and there's really good reason for this, are lockdown spaces that are reserved for people in a particular program. And that's awesome. I mean, you don't want people crawling under a car just because they happen to be in the room. But I think a makerspace needs to be accessible to everyone and visible to everyone. And that's what makes the Learning Commons an ideal place for it. I'm not saying that the Learning Commons doesn't have its problems. You have kids who come in here and they're madly studying for a test the next period, and I crank up the fume extractor and laser cutter next to them. So there's tensions in the space, but it's visible, it's open, and that's how you get the engagement as well, both individually and with teachers and classes. The other thing is that a makerspace it's a community, and it has to meet the needs of the community. It happened that we bought our 3D printer at a time when 3D printing technology was, at least on the consumer end, a fairly new thing. It was sexy. Kids were all over it. They wanted to see what it was about. Now we have students who go out and buy their own 3D printers and have them in their basements. However a makerspace is started, it has to meet the needs of the community. So it might be that the need is, in a high school, you don't actually have a place with crayons and paper and scissors and glue. Maybe that's the beginning of your makerspace. Very low tech, and that's a start. That's also a nice entry point for the person running the makerspace and whatever their expertise are. The number of times I've had to rebuild 3D printers, and I do not have a tech background. At least I'm comfortable with computers, but I don't tear them apart regularly. And the number of times I've had to take a motherboard out of the bottom of a 3D printer and rewire it, that's not going to be a comfort level of everybody. So you at least have to be comfortable doing that, or be willing to try it and grow and be comfortable with the uncomfortableness of that.
Right. So if we think of this whole idea of the growth of technology in education,
Yep.
What's really the bottom line of its role in teaching and learning, Mark?
I think what's interesting in this space is that there are entry points for almost anyone. You can create some really interesting art without necessarily spending the time developing the drawing skills and the the artistic skills to get in the door. That doesn't mean that you aren't going to come into the makerspace, try and do things and go, wow, the drawing side of this really appeals to me. I'm going to go off and take an art course because I want to get better at that. We had a drafting class in here, and I will admit the project did not work the way I expected it to, but I'm going to make it work. One of the cool things about our new laser cutter is you can draw on a piece of paper, scan to a PDF of an image, and then import it into the laser cutter and have it cut or engraved on the laser cutter. So in the drafting class, they were building first iterations of trebuchets and catapults. So they had hand drawn their designs, And the idea was we were going to scan them and then cut them. So we've taken out the whole CAD side of things, which is a stumbling block, and it's hard for an initial student to get their head around, but it's opens the door and it's like, okay, you see how that worked, you see where the inconsistencies were. Now we're going to take it into this piece of software and clean things up so it works even better. So it's it opens the door to a lot of things. It lowers barriers in some ways, and introduces students to other opportunities that they might not otherwise run into.
Yeah. Well, that is really super, and I hope those who are listening will take your advice, as they begin to adopt technology and place it at the center of the school and teaching and learning. Thank you so very much, Mark. We appreciate your time and all of your expertise.
Well,
bye-bye.
Thank you, David. Great talking as always. Bye-bye.